Hello and welcome to Aston University's coverage of COP26 as part of Aston Originals. You can follow us through COP26 at Aston Originals on Twitter, and also make sure you subscribe here on YouTube too. This is our third and final video around COP26, and it is around transport. It is being talked about at COP26 in Glasgow on the 10th of November. So who better to talk to than the three experts that we have on the panel today for Aston Originals? They are Dr. Lucy Rackliff, Alberto Almena.
Hello.
And Dr. Graeme Hayes.
Hello.
Let's go around the circle then, sort of circle, and just explain a little bit about who you are and what you do at Aston, starting with you, Lucy.
So I'm Lucy Rackliff. I'm a senior lecturer in transport in the Engineering and Physical Sciences School at Aston University. I teach on transport management, transport planning programs, and my research is around mostly road safety and the impact of ageing in particular.
Perfect. Alberto?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alberto Almena. I'm a research fellow at the EVRY at Aston University, and my research is focused in investigating the carbon dioxide removal potential of different technologies, net emission technologies such as bioenergy with carbon capture systems. And also we are applying that to produce sustainable aviation fuels.
Perfect. And Graeme?
Hi, everyone. I'm Graeme Hayes. I'm a sociologist. I teach here at Aston about the politics, policy and sociology of climate change, and I research social movements, particularly climate movements.
Perfect. Well, Graeme, I'm going to start with you, actually, just following on from an article you wrote for the conversation with Oscar Berglund, University of Bristol, around Insulating Britain. Blocking roads will alienate some people, but it's still likely to be effective. A lot of what Extinction Rebellion and Insulating Britain have done, possibly, over the last 18 months, 2 years, has been directly involved with transport and blocking transport. Just can you explain why that is?
Yeah, I think in terms of Insulate Britain and in terms of Extinction Rebellion, it's not necessarily the transport system itself that they are protesting against. I think in this case, what they're looking at are strategic pinch points. And that the goal, therefore, is to try to influence media and to try to influence public policy. And if you remember, Extinction Rebellion way back in November, when was it? November 2019, had an action on the DLR in East London, which I think got them a lot of very bad publicity, because here we are, we're talking about public transport, and we're talking about people who are trying to get to work very often in the service sector and in low-paid jobs, and very often from BME backgrounds, and being stopped by Extinction Rebellion. And I think a lot of people didn't understand why Extinction Rebellion would try and stop the Docklands Light Railway. I think with the M25, there is perhaps a little bit more of an understanding about our reliance structurally on car transport and on individuals driving cars, so a lack of car sharing, for instance. But really, this isn't about the car itself. Really, in that sense, this is about trying to attract attention and finding a way to do so by bringing the circulation of cars to a halt.
I think one of the things that you highlighted, Graeme, was that annoying people in this way does work. Do you think it works? Because a lot of people will say, you could be blocking someone going to a potentially life-saving appointment with their doctor or something like that. But then on the other side, the protesters will say that it doesn't matter, because if we don't have a world in which we can go to a doctor's appointment, then it's not really much point.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of attention on these kind of micro details about, people have got to get to schools, people have got to get to hospitals and so on and so forth. But look, our transport system is also one which is dysfunctional on that level. There are contraflows all the time. There are roadworks all the time. There are traffic jams all the time. I'm from Manchester. I live in Birmingham. I still go up and down the M6 every now and again. Try and get up and down the M6 in a timely fashion is never possible. And we, I think that type of argument, in a sense, highlights one of the problems, is that we don't really have a proper structural transport plan to think about how people should live and work and move around the neighborhoods in which they live. And I think, we focus on these motorways, but I think the city, and Birmingham is a really, really good example of this, is that the city needs to be planned a lot more rationally to think about the world that we're already in, never mind the world that we are going into. And therefore transport, and particularly transport on a local level from the bottom up, is badly in need of coherent, integrated, joined up thinking about climate, but also about just the livability of the city.
My area of expertise is around the kind of issues that Graeme's touched on already, which is around transport as part of the city, as part of the whole infrastructure. Graeme talked about the need for transport to be properly planned, but actually transport serves other sectors of the economy. That's what it does. It enables people to do other things. Mostly people don't want to travel. They want to see family, or they want to go shopping, or they want to go to a football game. They don't want to travel. That's just incidental along with all of those other things. And I think the issue with autonomous vehicles, that the technology is the easy part. It always is, relatively. The hard part is when you put the human beings into that technology, how they interact with it, how it affects the way they live their lives. And that is the big unknown, really, because they have the potential to make travel time even more productive than it already is. So at the moment, you can catch a bus, you can catch a train, you can catch up on your emails, you can prepare for a meeting. You can't do that if you're driving, you can't do that if you're on the roads. Autonomous pods make that a possibility. So then suddenly travel itself becomes a part of all the other things you're doing. And what we don't know is then you create more demand even. You have people who currently can't drive, who then can have that independent mobility. And all of those problems with the M6 become magnified by the addition of people who currently can't drive because they're too young, too unwell, or they're taking the train because they need to read meeting notes. They can do that in a pod. So for me, the technology is pretty incidental, really. It's the human interaction with the technology that we should be focusing on, I think.
So do you think that the UN talking about something like transport is something that absolutely does need to be done for that joined up approach? And even on a local level, I suppose, or at least at maybe a national level, I think there was a story of a farmer in Cornwall or something, and he sold some meat to Tesco. Tesco took it to their distribution centre, wherever it is in the Midlands, and processed it. And then it got taken back down to Cornwall and more or less sold over the road in the local Tesco over from where it was originally grown. So, that food has done a lot of miles to essentially go over the road, hasn't it? But it's that joined up approach that you mentioned there.
Yeah, and you can see similar things if you track your online shopping. You'll see similar things that, at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's practically on your doorstep, but by noon, it's gone 50 miles further up the road to come back to you again. I think it's good to see transport having a profile. And if you look at the party manifestos around general elections, sometimes it's not even there at all. Sometimes it's there as a kind of, we're going to do lots for the economy, including stuff with transport. To actually see it then as a priority in its own right is first of all, absolutely correct, because all of the other things we want to do can't be done without it. But the fact that it's not usually there as a standalone policy priority means that if it's working well, people don't notice it, and it's only when it's not that people start to question it.
Alberto, we've talked about roads. So road transport does account for 10% of global emissions, and its emissions are rising faster than those of any other sector. But when we talk about aviation, it's a little bit like the elephant in the room, really, because I suppose there are a lot of emissions that come out of those things that are flying around in the sky. Could you just talk to us a little bit about emissions, because they are being included in targets now, aren't they, from aviation?
Absolutely. Aviation is one of those topics that usually are avoided, let's say, especially international aviation. But just to put a bit on the context of what is the contribution of this sector to the global emission, I can tell that the emissions associated to the international aviation is around 2% of global emission. That number might not seem really high, but if we put in national context, for example, that is more than double the contribution of the UK, probably half, more or less half of the contribution of the entire European Union. So it's quite a relevant number here. And the UK has been traditionally been a pioneer in climate change mitigation. And this time also, they've been brave enough to include the international aviation contribution in the carbon budget that have been passed to law with the climate order to 2021. And it's a very, very good, it's a very great step to fight against the international aviation contribution, because this has been one of the sectors that are hardest to decarbonize due to the increase on demand by people. People love traveling. People want to travel just to know other culture, other countries. They want to have nice holidays in warm places. This most of the time involve flying. So when you analyze the progression from 1990, the emissions in the year 1990, that is a benchmark year where we take all the emissions and we want to compare to this year, we see that in the UK case, energy supply have made a very good outcome on decarbonizing the sector. Same for waste treatment. With domestic transport is good because these levels are more or less frozen. But when you assess international aviation share, these have increased in more than 100% over the 1990 figures. So it's good to include that in the carbon budget and trying to decarbonize.
Graeme, you mentioned Manchester, where you're from. Manchester United flew to Leicester the other day for a football match, 100 miles. Do the public, and me included in this, go, what is the point in, scrambling around for a paper straw when Manchester United can freely get on an airplane and fly 100 miles?
It didn't do them much good, I note, as a Manchester City fan. I think in some ways we're very often diverted to individual behaviors, to personal behaviors. And I think, most of us like to see ourselves as good environmental citizens. I think there's also a sense that we have to take a more structural approach to these questions. These questions aren't primarily a case of individuals changing their own behaviors. It's about the structure of the economy and what it is that you're able to do and not able to do. And I was struck about the structuring of our own lives around things like work and school and home and jobs and so on, about how we have to move around and negotiate the city. And very often, we feel, I think we do feel that we have to be kind of morally correct in how we behave. But I think we also lay ourselves open much too easily to accusations of hypocrisy simply for living in a situation where we have few alternatives other than to be part of the world which is set out in front of us. And so, even though I would turn around and say, look, I think Leicester City are really interesting. Leicester City have got a massive new training ground to the highest possible environmentally friendly standard. It's extraordinary. And yet this is the environmentalism, the sustainability of the rich. I think we need to start changing the framework through which we see things and start to think about how people can live, can work, and can move in their daily lives. And I'm not sure that this emphasis on luxury emissions as being as revealing anything other than this is how the super rich behave gets us very far in trying to develop a different type of politics or a different series of public policies which are able to be at the level that we need and at the scale and the speed that we need in order to be able to truly develop a series of responses to the climate emergency.
Some great social points there, Graeme. Lucy, from maybe a different angle and infrastructure, when we look at the infrastructure of this country, how much work do you think needs to be done to get where the UK needs to be?
I think it's a huge job to generate the kind of radical change that Graeme's talking about. I agree with Graeme. I think it's all well and good. For example, running projects where you knock on doors and say, did you know there's a bus stop at the end of your road? Did you know how cheap the bus is? Here's a free ticket, give it a go. We need something much, much more radical than that. And I think for me, one of the things that strikes me when you look around a city like Birmingham, Milton Keynes, if you look at an aerial shot of that, the amount of land we give over to facilitating cars is insane. And as long as we continue to do that, we're never going to see the sort of change that we need to see. We need that land to be put for other activities and other uses, not just moving and storing cars. So I think from my perspective, in terms of the kind of changes I'd like to see in my lifetime, it's a huge volume of work and needs much more a radical approach. Not, Graeme's right. Man United shouldn't have flown from Manchester to Leicester. I used the M6 that particular weekend, and I can't say I blame them really. In many respects, it was appalling. But that's not the problem. The problem is we've developed a planning system. We've developed a way of living our lives that facilitates, encourages, and for some people depends upon having access to private, fossil fuel driven motorized vehicles.
Alberto, on the point of aviation, does it come down to a little bit of supply and demand? And sometimes it could be about cutting the supply. We're looking at sort of short haul flights are probably some of the biggest contributors, aren't they, in terms of the emissions that they throw out over the period of time that they do. So what are your thoughts on that sort of thing? I mean, I think it was raised in possibly a meeting we were in last week, Graeme, and it might have even been from you, that you said Birmingham has great connections for city breaks in the airport. I don't know if it was you actually. You're not that cultured. Yeah. But is the choice that we have so vast now that people will treat an airplane like a car and just go and see a different city and go for somewhere a little bit warmer?
I think it's more comfortable to use cars for now, like for short traveling. When you are going to the airport, you need to be spend some time there, do all the check-in, do all the security like protocol. And I don't think people will opt for that. They will prioritize road transport for now, and that's why
it comes back to the infrastructure thing, doesn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, the infrastructure. And also, it's not that simple, aviation. It's not like a car. You get a car from home to the point you want to reach. Usually flying involves more than one transport medium. So it's more of convenience. So if you want to fly from here to Scotland, you will need to use a bus to the airport or a train. Then you need to take the train. Then you land in the other airport. Then you need to take another train or another taxi to the destination you want. So in the end, you are using more than one transportation medium. So yeah.
Let's have a look at the rolling ticker along the bottom of the screen at the moment, which says the UK government says it is working to kickstart the commercialisation of sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. Alberto, could you explain what a SAF is?
Well, this is funny because recently we have a big meeting in the Royal Society, and we were trying. One of the points was evaluating what can we consider as sustainable aviation fuel. Is this an umbrella term for multiple technologies? Is a specific technology? We ended thinking that is more better used as an umbrella term that includes much different technologies to produce a low carbon fuel. So we can have e-fuels, that is basically using the power to convert it to fuel that can be used for jet engines. We have also hydrogen that can be considered. We can have ammonia that can be used as a hydrogen vector for fueling the aircraft. But basically, most of the people, what they will understand as sustainable aviation fuel is the biojet fuels, like obtained from biomass, or even they can consider synthetic aviation fuels also, that are improved fuels that you have higher specs to improve the efficiency of the fuel in the engine. So it's a very good, because we discuss about that, about this topic. And yes, each of one, we will in the end need all of these technologies trying to decarbonize this sector. I personally believe that there is a certain application for each one of them, as I said before. So, for example, we cannot, with the technology we have now, but probably we cannot use a 100% electrified flight. But for example, I will say that electrifying or hydrogen will be for a short haul, because if it involves a really high volume, for example, hydrogen, that needs to change the design of the aircraft. So, for example, for long haul flights, we will need to aim the jet fuel that is obtaining fuel from biomass. We can have a different feedstock, like residues, like municipal solid waste, that can be converted to this type of fuels. And since it involves the use of biomass, we have some carbon dioxide removal properties that can lower the carbon intensity of flying. But always we need to do it with having sustainability as the focus of everything we are doing. As we discussed previously to the recording with Graeme, like sustainability needs to be the focus of everything. There is a strong land competition here. There is a strong competition for resources. Aviation will need to compete with road transport. Probably it will be a priority, the road transport. It needs to compete with energy supply. And we don't have enough sustainable biomass. We cannot just take agricultural land or forest and turn it to energy crops. This is not an option.
Because that was something that you mentioned, wasn't it, Graeme, when you're saying land for food or land for fuel? I suppose some newspapers might say that we could grow food in it, but there might not be anybody to pick it necessarily. But do you think, from a sociology point of view, do you think that people would put up with that? Would they say, well, I want to have my city break, but I can't go on holiday?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say as a sociologist is say, who do you mean by we? And, the first thing I'd point out is that, we have to look, if we look at this from the point of view of the global rich, then, you can start talking about new fuels and supplying sustainable aviation fuel to allow a global elite to continue to move around the way it's always moved around. But that's taking away effectively resources, or competing with resources which the global poor need in order to be able to feed, to eat, to survive, to subsist. And I think, we have similar problems effectively with afforestation, which is, one of the kind of carbon sinks that's often put forward. This is land. This is land which very often is inappropriate to plant trees on, and which the wrong types of tree are very often planted on as well, and land which belongs to other people, or land which could be used to sustain the lives of people who are part of the global poor. And therefore, I think we have a very strongly technological response to some of these questions. We like to figure out problems and work out, well, let's look at this from the point of view of aviation. What do we do about this, and how do we make this work? But maybe one of the questions is to really think about the types of social system that we live in, and to think about, well, what is it that we want to prioritize, rather than necessarily how do we maintain the system that we live in at the moment. And I think, one of the things that I would certainly say about UK climate policy in particular is it's all bent around sustaining a type of system which is effectively unsustainable and certainly unjust.
Graeme, are you saying that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos playing Star Wars isn't helping anybody? Is that what you're saying?
Playing with me. Do you remember when billionaires used to be philanthropists?
Well, yeah, those are the days.
Send themselves off to try and privatize a new stratosphere. No, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Right, okay, let's round it off. Some really good points in there. Well, I'm going to finish off with one more question that's a yes or no, and I have a feeling I know what Graeme's answer will be. But the question, I'll start with you, Alberto, is do you think COP26 will work?
I hope so.
It's a yes or no. I'm being very strict on this because there's been so many people sitting on the fence.
I think no. Not for
Lucy.
As an academic, I want to know how you're defining work. Maybe.
Do you think there'll be a COP27?
Depends what your metric is for determining what it has worked, looks like. But yeah, I guess a no, really, realistically. I'd like to be optimistic, but
Graeme, is it a clean sweep of no's?
Look, if you set the bar really low, I think you'll be delighted. But the type of action that's needed is not going to come from the COP.
Yeah, I suppose the bar needs to be 1.5 degrees by 2050, but we've only got a couple of minutes left and we haven't got that long to wait and see if we were right. So we will say goodbye to Alberto, Lucy and Graeme. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great insight into this. And like I said at the beginning, if you want to get involved with our coverage of COP26, it's at Aston Originals on Twitter. And also there is more information at aston.ac.uk. You can go and check out our COP26 page there. Otherwise, it is a goodbye from me. Goodbye from Alberto, Lucy and Graeme too.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
See you.